Hi guys, welcome to the latest episode of the On the Head podcast. Myself and Vincent this time are joined by Ciaran Clancy, who is a nutritionist, PT, triathlete. Anything you don't do, Ciaran?
Yeah, well, I've jumped around from a lot of different things over the last number of years. So I think maybe not too dissimilar to most people, just trying to find your niche, trying to find something that you enjoy doing. I think so. That's all I do at the minute, anyway. So yeah, I'm quite happy where I am at the minute. Like, so yeah, that's.
And our listeners will probably know. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that our listeners will probably know you were saying there that you're from Leitrim, up in around Bundoran, the second West Belfast.
Yeah, is my accent a giveaway? Is that obvious?
Just a tad.
If you need to put up subtitles or anything, I'm fine with that.
If they can understand me, then you'll be all right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vincent.
So, Ciaran, for people that don't know, do you want to just give a wee brief rundown of what you're doing at the minute in terms of your training, or if you are training, and of the nutrition side of things? Do you want to just give a wee rundown?
I suppose so. Like since March here, since sort of lockdown began, everything kind of shut down. Gyms closed. Most businesses closed down. So I was working out of a gym in my local town, doing personal training, doing spin classes, doing nutritional consultations as well. So since then, I've just trying to do more sort of stuff online. I've started doing a specialized course in sports nutrition. So just trying to get time to do these things that you probably wouldn't normally have time to do. So just trying to do that more really at the minute, So it's going well. It's going well. So kind of just learning new skills and sort of trying to continually push yourself and develop as an individual, really.
And have you moved yourself online? Are you doing consultations on stuff like Zoom or phone calls? Are you still working a wee bit?
No, not so much. No, like personally, I like the human contact and the training with individuals, because you lose a lot really when you're sort of trying to do Zoom classes. They are great and everything, but to be honest, like, you have to be passionate about something to actually properly sell it. And I feel like doing those classes in person are far more invaluable than actually, doing one-on-one or doing online classes really. So I have still been doing a few nutritional consultations, which are a wee bit easier online. So you're kind of going through someone's diet, trying to help them out sort of with different health issues. So that's been much easier to do, we'll say, than training or classes online.
Ciaran, I see there it says on your poster, food affects mood affects change. Personally, I suffer badly from anxiety and OCD, but I will openly admit that my diet is pathetic. What could, and obviously some of our listeners may be in the same boat, how could you suggest for someone like myself that nutrition could change, your mood and your outlook?
Yeah, so like, even like, if from a very basic standpoint, like your body uses nutrients. It doesn't know the difference between like an apple or like a spud or whatever, a potato that you eat. Like, it's those nutrients that your body actually utilizes and absorbs to create neurotransmitters for like cognitive function, different chemicals for like different body functions, and even energy. So from a basic standpoint, like what you eat today affects your mood and energy levels tomorrow. So it's quite a hard sell to somebody, because if I was to ask you, Paul or Vincent, what did you eat for like lunch 2 days ago or yesterday, you kind of have trouble trying to remember, and trying to tell someone that, like, what you're going to consume, we'll say, for lunch today will actually have an impact on your thought process tomorrow, or your energy, or how you feel. So it can be quite a hard sell to people. But I think from my own personal experience, and why I got so passionate about nutrition, was I would just a run-of-the-middle sort of diet, really, not too sort of impressive, lots of junk food, lots of takeaways. And it was around that sort of time I was kind of getting more into training and doing triathlons and doing a wee bit more running. Like, I had come from a position where I was smoking, probably drinking too much, eating bad food, and I just kind of needed to change what I was doing, really. And from that, I kind of started to clean up my diet a bit, and I got to a point where I went from maybe, eliminating red meat and then chicken, and then I was eating fish and eggs. Over that kind of period, I realized that not only like after hard training sessions was I recovering faster, but I had more energy as well. So I lived through that to sort of like be able to experience it. And I think you need to do that yourself. It's hard, like, for someone to go, why don't you eat this certain food or eat this way? Because they go, well, sure, that's not going to really change anything or make me feel any different. You kind of have to live through it. So you have to be willing to make the changes yourself, or commit, for like even 30 days or a month. And then once you notice the changes yourself, you can actually then, see the benefits of eating healthier, really. Yeah. So
see, I would think that my palate wouldn't be, obviously people would eat a lot of salmon and stuff and good things, but whenever I try these foods, it's almost as if my palate is rejecting them. Is there any way that you can sort of retrain your body to eat better?
Your taste buds, like, you've got different taste buds on your tongue, like, and they change over like weeks and months. So like when you are eating, we'll say, a lot of high salt, high sugar, high fat, those three things are really, really tasty, and they're added into all sort of like packaged foods and takeaways, and they make food that sort of really appealing, and you get that sort of reward mechanism from eating them. And then if you go from, we'll say, eating something high sugar, high fat, high salt, to like some steamed broccoli or something, which effectively, is tasteless to somebody that's been kind of eating all those processed foods. So it's kind of it's like anything, really. You kind of need to introduce it slowly and gradually, really, to allow your body to adapt, allow your taste buds to change. But there will change. You can actually then start to taste again. It's like someone who may have been smoking for decades. When you smoke, you lose your sense of taste, but it does recover afterwards once you stop smoking. So it's kind of similar with sort of like processed food. Like the flavors in those foods are so heightened and so tasty. But once you sort of start to eliminate those and increase more kind of the fruits and vegetables and whole grains, your taste buds do change. So that would probably be a start.
Yeah. Just before we go too deep into the sort of nutritional health side of things, I wanted to talk a wee tiny bit about the modern diet. What would be the standard American, British, Irish diet? A lot of processed food, a lot of takeaways, alcohol, cigarette. How bad is that actually for us? You see a lot of scaremongering. Do you have any of the facts for us?
Yeah. Well, like, first off, like, just as I was mentioning, I think, people will know that, like, processed food, takeaway foods is kind of like, they know it is bad. But what I think people fail to realize is that the sort of like the healthy food, your fruit and veg and your grains and your healthy lean cut meats and fish and eggs and all that, like, how good they actually are for you is just kind of a missing link there, I think, with people. And getting an understanding of how beneficial they are can be sort of like mind changing and just huge altogether. Like, the obesity epidemic is rife in sort of like, with us and in America, in the UK, where to a point like where, like, kids are like obese now, and they've got sort of the development of what's known as atherosclerosis, which is like fatty plaque buildup in the arteries at a very young age, as young as 10. And that's purely down to sort of like diet, because that's just sort of a process of too much sugar, too much fat in your diet that allows these kind of fatty streaks to develop in the arteries. And over time, that can lead to sort of like blockages or pieces of the plaques breaking off and causing strokes and stuff further in life. And that's in kids as young as 10, and that's something that we didn't see like 20, 30 years ago. And that's down to the changes in sort of lifestyle and diet. Kids aren't moving anymore. diets are a lot worse. Like I know when I was growing up back in the 80s, my diet probably wasn't that good either, but I was still eating sort of, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And then in between that, I might have been having like really bad snacks or unhealthy snacks. Whereas today, kids may or may not even be having breakfast. But if they are, it's probably like a sugar cereal. Then, for lunch, it could be just sort of more processed food again. And then for dinner, it could be just takeaway food because parents are rushing home from work. They don't have time to spend with their kids. So like that kid is getting like the worst food over the course of the day. And not only are they not getting sort of the nutrients, macronutrients and micronutrients that the body needs to survive, it's also kind of instilling a sense that this food is okay to eat. And that kind of transitions into sort of teenage years and adulthood as well, so that's where we are at the minute with sort of nutrition for kids and stuff. But not only that as well, it's you're probably familiar with sort of like blood sugar and people that might be diabetic, who they have to sort of inject insulin to manage and control their blood sugar. So that's type 2 diabetes, and obviously then that's impacted on the food that we eat. Type 2 diabetes has gone through the roof as well in the last few decades, and it can actually be reversed by eliminating all the sort of processed foods out of the diet and including more sort of whole foods. The reason being is that all those processed foods are, what we call beige foods. They're made with like white flour, salt, sugar, and fat. And when you consume them, the body has very, very little work to do to break them down. So what happens is when they're broken down, the sugar is released from the food and it just goes into the bloodstream really, really quickly. And it spikes a hormone known as insulin. So the hormone spikes up really, really, or blood sugar spikes up really high. Then insulin comes and takes the sugar and brings it into the cell for energy. But what happens is then the blood sugar dips off really, really quickly, and you get sort of cravings for more sort of up the same, more kind of sugary foods, and you kind of what we call a blood sugar roller coaster. You eat more of the same, and it goes back up and back down. And it's this kind of continuous roller coaster of blood sugar throughout the day that's actually detrimental and really, really bad for health, because what you want is a nice kind of even, steady blood sugar throughout the day. And that, in sort of real terms, or what that would feel like in everyday life, you'd have a nice baseline of energy throughout the day, as opposed to, having these ups and downs of energy, like where you're fatigued and then you eat something sugar or have a coffee and you're back up again. So that's kind of key as well, is kind of managing your blood sugar, which definitely young people aren't doing today either, so yep, that's.
So what can we do in terms of, I know we're not going to change the whole system in one day or one conversation, but if you were to start now and if we gave you the power, what would you do?
Well, I think like definitely Jamie Oliver was on to something like a good few years back, when he was trying to reintroduce sort of healthier school dinners for kids. Like why I got into nutrition in the first place is because I'm passionate about it and I know it works. It's not kind of like some sort of snake oil salesman anymore, really. It's sort of like nutrition is brought to the fore. People are more aware of sort of healthy eating and the benefits of it. But I think where the problem probably lies is just through education, really. So getting into schools and being able to sort of educate young people about sort of like healthy eating, about what sort of foods are good for them, and not having sort of good or bad food really, but sort of like, the food that's less healthy for the body, they can still be used as treats. Because what happens when you introduce sort of more healthy foods, you have less cravings for the sort of like processed foods, really. So definitely getting into the schools is key, because that's where you're getting at the sort of young people, and you can change sort of the process of kind of what they think about food. So just like yourself, Vincent, I actually I was teaching in FE and HE for 5 or 6 years, and I would see firsthand students coming in the morning time with the probably no breakfast. If they were having breakfast, it was coming in with like a McDonald's or something like this. And the students that weren't having breakfast were like coming in with sort of cans of Monster, which are, you know, very, very high caffeinated drinks. And these are students as well that were suffering from sort of like anxiety. And if you think about it from like a biological, from your body, kind of the process of how it takes on caffeine. If you're loading caffeine into a body, an empty stomach early morning, it's just going to sort of like increase adrenaline, increase your cortisol, stress hormones. So you're going to feel more anxious. But there was like a massive divide between like students understanding that and what they're doing really. And then obviously there's the addictive component of caffeine as well. So, you know, there was, when I was actually teaching, I would like question my students about what they had for breakfast and what they were eating. This was like at the time when I was studying part-time nutrition as well at the weekends. So my students began to kind of question why I was suddenly having an interest in their eating habits and nutrition and all that. Like, so, but you know, if those students were like 16, 18 year olds, if they had sort of more of a exposure to nutrition growing up and about sort of healthy eating, that would sort of then change throughout their life really. So I think it's fundamental to kind of get at the younger generation to help sort of educate really.
And see the healthier foods, especially fruit, for example, here in the north. I'm not sure what it's like across the border, but it seems to be more accessible and cheaper to buy what we would call rubbish, you know, crisps, chocolate, than it is to go and buy like a carton of blueberries or raspberries. Is for people that are in social deprived areas and stuff that don't have that much money, how could you think of any way that should the government be taxing maybe the rubbish foods more so that the other foods are more accessible to buy?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. There was like discussion around sort of a sugar tax and stuff around sort of processed food, you know, to sort of make them a bit more expensive so that they're not as cheap as they are. Like that, those students that used to go in and buy their cans of Monster or like the equivalent cans of those like half a liter of energy drinks, they're made so appealing because they're so cheap to students. You know, they can go in and they can buy them. You know, whereas like you were mentioning about sort of like fruits and different things like that, like some of those foods are expensive, but you know, there's so many foods then that you can just start to introduce that would be the staples of your diet. Like you can go out and buy a massive bag of rice. You can buy like massive bags of frozen vegetables that will like keep for weeks in like freezer or as long as you want, and canned like beans or even dried beans like legumes and pulses and all that. They're not expensive foods. It's just that people aren't educated or of what to do with them because it's just not in their psyche really, you know. Whereas the idea of, you know, getting sort of a pizza or getting sort of like chips and putting them in the oven, that is because it's promoted and it's marketed to everybody, you know. So I suppose to like get back to what you were saying about sort of the government trying to like educate and inform people around this, because like if you think about it, like the amount of money that's spent on healthcare for like someone who like would have not looked after the diet through their entire life, they're going to run into health problems. That's sort of a given. We see it already with obesity, diabetes, you know, heart disease, high blood pressure. They're all sort of symptoms of sort of you know, poor diet, maybe lack of exercise. So if there was money pumped into sort of the promotion of healthy eating and nutrition, it would sort of negate then the like money that would have to be spent on sort of healthcare down the line. So I think it's just a bit of foresight and a wee bit more sort of promotion around it with governments, but I think there's still a long way to go really, I think.
Just while you say that, it definitely does seem to me that your sort of information and the sort of nutritional information is underrepresented in the mainstream media. And also, I don't know anything, but it seems to me like it's a wee bit outdated the nutrition pyramid that kids would use in school and that's on the curriculum. It seems to me counterintuitive to everything that's came out since they were published. Where they're telling us that we should form the bulk of our diet on like carbohydrates, and from what I've read, that doesn't seem to be the best approach.
Yeah, well, like I suppose so in the South here we have like a food pyramid, and then sort of in the UK a food plate. So it's the exact same sort of idea. It's about like where the majority of your diet should lie, whether it's carbohydrates, fats, or protein. But like there's another aspect to sort of like the food pyramid and the food plate as well, is that like, well, who creates this and who is sort of lobbying sort of governments to allow them to sort of, say that this food group is more important than this food group, really. But I think with the sort of food pyramid, that people have sort of a misconception around sort of, we'll say, certain types of foods. Like you mentioned, like carbohydrates, for example, people are just going to think of like pasta, bread, and rice, but carbohydrates actually encompass vegetables and fruit as well, so that kind of gets left out of the kind of thinking when you're talking about carbohydrates. But I think it's about kind of, if you're starting off as well, nutrition can be just such a minefield that people, you hear study after study contradicting each other week on week, that people just kind of go, well, you know what, I'm not actually going to do anything because none of it makes sense anymore. But I think like from a simple point of view, and from trying to get yourself to eat more healthy, just by sort of like, slowly introducing more kind of like fruits and veg into your diet, and just by doing so, that will kind of push out sort of the late night snacks because you're fuller. Like there's certain types of food that are essential for the body that we're not eating. For example, 80% of sort of the population is fiber deficient. Fiber is only found in sort of vegetables and fruit. And if you're not eating sort of any vegetables or fruit in your diet, then your body is completely devoid of fiber, because the fiber is removed from processed foods because it's unnecessary. It's just it's add bulk. There's no taste or flavor to it. And there's even certain types of fiber that when you eat them, that it actually just passes right through your digestive system and makes its way into the large intestine. And when that fiber is in your large intestine, there's bacteria in your large intestine that actually feed on it and contribute towards like a healthy gut. So the bacteria that are living in there have huge impact on sort of like not just how your digestion works, but a knock-on effect of actually different chemicals that are made. So I'm not sure if you've heard about sort of the serotonin, which is responsible for your mood. 90% of your serotonin is actually made in your gut. So, having a healthy gut microbiome is essential to making sure that, like, you've got adequate serotonin levels being made as well. So there's so much work looking into the gut microbiome now. So the gut microbiome is basically just the colony of bacteria and fungi that live in your gut, and they predominantly live in the large intestine. And I think when there's more sort of studies and more information that are coming out about this, then hopefully that will create more of a drive towards the understanding of, like, actually what we need to be doing is feeding this colony of bacteria and fungi in our gut for actually optimal health. Because a lot of the studies out there are suggesting that's where health lies at the minute, really. So
yeah, I've heard that. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask a question about the gut, the 90% thing. On that figure, for somebody like myself or other people who may suffer badly with their diet, which has an effect on their mental health, where would be a good starting point in terms of, like, what small changes could you implement that you would be able to manage on a day-by-day basis?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna probably throw it back at you. I'm gonna ask you what you have for breakfast this morning, then, Paul.
Honestly, Cocoa Pops.
Cocoa Pops, right? So even if you were just to take simply just take one meal, okay? So Cocoa Pops, as I mentioned before, they're they're made probably from like refined rice that has the fiber removed. So it's pretty high in sugar, and then you put like coated in chocolate, so it's even higher in sugar. So when you take that on board, it's just like you're eating that, and it's practically dissolved and broken down in your mouth before it even hits your stomach. So it's basically just like liquid sugar. So it's not going to fill you up. So another sort of aspect of fiber as well is that it makes you feel fuller for longer. So if you were to have, for example, you could have porridge or oats in the morning, okay? A good trick is, if you still like that kind of chocolatey taste, you can get like cacao powder. You can pick up a box for like €1 or so. And
I'm gonna write this down in my notes here on my phone.
It's my kind of go-to breakfast of choice, really. So like you can do it hot or cold. So you can cook your oats like you would do normally. Put in cacao powder into it and stir it around. So cacao powder itself is quite bitter. It's what they make chocolate out of. So if you want to, then maybe you can chop in a banana into it, make it sweeter, or you can even add in a wee bit of honey or whatever, and stir that up. So like you've gone from eating something that's going to be burnt through really quickly, not going to fill you up, and it's going to leave you kind of craving something pretty quickly after eating it, to like the oats that are like high in nutrients. They're going to fill you up. They're just more nutrient dense, and even the cacao powder itself, if you into exercise or anything like that, cacao powder is high in antioxidants, so it's going to help recovery, and it's going to help sort of ease kind of sore muscles and reduce inflammation as well. So you've gone from eating something that's almost devoid of nutrition to something that's almost like really packed of nutrition. And if you kind of think about, like, every time you put something into your mouth, you're being given the opportunity to, do something healthy that's going to benefit you in the long run, or isn't going to benefit your health, really. So just even spending 1 week or 2 weeks and just focusing on getting that sort of breakfast nailed down to a point where it becomes a habit. And, at first you might kind of go, well, I might need to add in more honey to make this sweeter because I'm used to eating Cocoa Pops. That's fine. It's small changes, but over time then you might kind of go, I don't need as much honey, or, your taste buds will change. So focusing on one meal for like a number of weeks is probably a good place to start, really.
It's not really a good look for a 30-year-old man, is it, eating a bowl of Cocoa Pops?
Well, it's quite common. Like I think before I started off in nutrition, and I was kind of getting more into health, I used to be very very preachy, and you'd sort of like see people eating certain ways, and you'd kind of look at them in disgust, and you kind of go, it's just not a nice trait for someone to have, and people don't listen to you. So I think right now I look at things completely differently. I kind of see, well, someone is on sort of like a path to kind of maybe eat more healthy. If they're open to kind of want to change, then I'll happily help them. But yeah, I'm not going to go and start criticizing someone for eating a certain way, because I've done the exact same thing like years ago. So I'd be pretty big hypocrite if I was to sort of start giving out to somebody for eating a certain way.
Yeah. Ask Vincent. Hopefully he's had a bar of chocolate or something.
So Vincent, what did you have for breakfast?
Nothing. I don't eat breakfast.
You don't eat breakfast?
Never. Which brings me on. I want to get to this now. Seems to me, certainly in the sort of mainstream media, a lot of the focus is on what you eat. Are you paleo? Are you keto? Are you this? How important is it? And certainly there seems to be a lot of research, although most of it in mice/rats, about when you eat, the timing of your meals, whether you're 5-2 or you're time restricted eating, or you're 1 meal a day. How important is when you eat as opposed to what you eat, or maybe tying them together?
Yeah. So I think we're kind of just to make it kind of clear that what we've just kind of talked about is maybe somebody starting off and you're trying to make one meal different, or trying to introduce some healthy food, which is a great place to start, and that's obviously going to hopefully have a knock on the rest of the meals and how you eat and everything. Then to go from that to actually maybe thinking more in terms of like the food that I eat, how can that impact on maybe my lifespan, how long I live, the longevity, how healthy I will be over like decades. And that then kind of goes down into the nitty gritty of like diets, I suppose, whether like you're kind of a high fat diet or high carb diet, or even what you mentioned there, Vincent, about 5-2, so kind of fasting protocol. So when you say that you don't have breakfast, is that because you're practicing sort of fasting in the morning time, or is it?
It's more so of, I don't really feel like I need to eat. I hate being chained to sort of, you have to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and 3 snacks. I can't eat that much food. I don't enjoy it. So there's times when I'll get to lunchtime and go, I'm hungry, eat. There's also times that I go, Jesus, I haven't eaten at dinner time. But that's been for so long.
Yeah, that's like that old school way of thinking was kind of like, you have to eat breakfast. If you're making sure that, by not having breakfast, you're not like stopping off on the way to work to get a coffee and a pastry, because essentially that is your breakfast then. But if you wake up in the morning and you're not hungry, it's fine not to have breakfast, because there's no point in letting like a clock dictate when you eat. You should actually truly listen to your body and understand when it's hungry. And by skipping breakfast, I'd say by lunchtime, then you're actually genuinely hungry and you're ready to eat, and you're ready to sort of absorb nutrients. And there's kind of a school of thinking as well, is that like when you're constantly grazing and constantly eating, not only is your blood sugar levels kind of up and down throughout the day, but when you kind of have such a long gap between your meal, they say that your body is actually ready to absorb the nutrients from that meal, because you actually haven't had any food in a long period of time. So there's lots of really interesting studies and work out there about sort of not constantly grazing throughout the day and leaving sort of periods where you don't eat. So like we all have practiced fasting for at least 8 hours last night when we were in bed. And there's work being carried out. You mentioned about the 5-2 diet, which is like a diet by Dr. Michael Mosley that reduces the amount of calories that you consume to around, I think you're eating like 50 or 75% less calories than you would on a normal day. And you're doing that for 2 days out of a week. And the benefit out of sort of calorie reduction seems to be that it allows your body to sort of start to go through a process where it kind of cleans itself up. So constantly eating food every day or every hour of every day, digestion is a really taxing process on the body, because it takes up so much energy. If you've ever eaten a big meal and you kind of feel lethargic after, that's because all the blood has just gone to your digestive system and you're feeling a bit lethargic because your body's breaking down that food. So with fasting or with sort of like leaving lengthier times between meals, it allows your body to go through this process called autophagy, which basically means self-eating. So we all have like damaged cells and cells that are no longer functioning properly. And when you do leave gaps or when you do fast, it allows your body to sort of go into that sort of autophagy process, and it starts to break down those cells and kind of just reuse the proteins in them and get rid of all the sort of unnecessary waste. So there's huge health benefits out of like fasting and sort of like calorie reduction if it's done well and it's done smart. So you want to be kind of at a level with your nutrition where you're having like good healthy fats and good healthy carbohydrates and proteins with your meal. I wouldn't recommend doing that for somebody who will say is still on the sort of learning curve or starting off with their kind of diet, and it's not sort of it's not too good, because the actual process of not eating as well can be quite stressful for the body. You might find that for whatever reason throughout the day, if you've left a big gap between the meal, you can start to get what we call kind of hangry, where you're kind of hungry and angry at the same time, and that can be down to just the fact that cortisol levels are beginning to increase. So cortisol is your stress hormone, and when cortisol increases, you just start to feel a wee bit more anxious and a wee bit more on edge. And what actually helps to curb cortisol and kind of drop it back down is glucose, because glucose is kind of like the body's preferred form of energy. So when you take on board kind of food, your glucose levels go up, and then cortisol sort of dips back down. So yeah, I wouldn't, again, like anything I'm sort of mentioning here, it's always best to get sort of advice from sort of a healthcare professional or a nutritionist or a dietitian before you kind of start to kind of get too heavy with things, especially with fasting, because it can be quite stressful for the body. But your body, Vincent, you're probably been doing it so long now that what happens when you do sort of do these prolonged kind of sessions without eating is that, so I mentioned about glucose being the preferred source of energy for the body, and that comes from carbohydrates. So when you stop kind of consuming food, your body has to think about creating energy another way. And because we've got an abundance of fat in our body, what it does is it changes, your body changes from predominantly burning fat or carbohydrates or glucose as a fuel to burning fat as a fuel. So you may have heard in the sort of fitness or nutrition realms, become more fat adapted. So becoming more fat adapted means your body is using fat predominantly more as a fuel source over carbohydrates or glucose, and that's a good thing, and it can be really beneficial for certain athletes, maybe endurance athletes or people that are looking to maybe shed fat or lose weight. And I actually stumbled kind of into it myself, because when I was teaching, you're kind of you can go hours without kind of eating because you can be quite on the go and trying to get things done. So when I started teaching first, it was quite stressful, and there was days where I'd go from I'd have maybe breakfast in the morning, but then I could go from 7 a.m. right through to the 5 p.m. and I wouldn't have eaten, and I was still had energy, and I still felt okay. So I kind of started to explore that a wee bit more, and that's when I kind of started to get into the sort of the whole world of kind of fasting and sort of the 5-2 diet and all that. So it's again, it's really interesting, and it's kind of at the sort of cutting edge of sort of nutrition in terms of sort of trying to live longer, healthier, I suppose.
Would there be any evidence to support basically a theory, say for toxic, even if we take the last 50 years, for example? Obviously the population of the world has grew, but is there any evidence to back up the terms whenever obviously fast food and stuff started to come to the fore that diabetes, heart disease has kicked up on a percentage?
Oh, definitely. I wouldn't have the stats offhand, but there's definitely sort of if not like the direct causation, there's a correlation between sort of the between the increase in sort of processed foods and sort of like the different sort of health conditions that we're seeing today. You know, there's so many. So back in sort of 50s, 60s, processed foods became more popular, and fat was demonized as well. So the sort of we still have the kind of stigma around fat in today's society, where, you know, my parents would still kind of go, oh, like fat is bad. You have to buy low fat sort of products, low fat this, low fat that. But it's completely changed the whole nutrition world thinking on sort of fat. So the fat is actually good. Fat is healthy. Fat actually, so healthy fats fill you up, whereas like foods like that are processed with sugars that I mentioned are broken down really quickly and don't really fill you up. So like definitely the increase in sort of processed foods, more sort of imbalances in your blood sugar, it's going to make you a greater risk for developing conditions like diabetes. And not only that, but like sugar is used for our body for fuel source, so glucose, but it has to be taken from the blood and brought into the cell where it's actually used for energy. And that's insulin's job. If for whatever reason that's not working properly, like with type 2 diabetes, that sugar like kind of floats around in the bloodstream, and that's really dangerous. Sugar is actually toxic to the body, and it can damage sort of the blood vessels. It can cause kind of scarring on the blood vessels and start kind of the development of plaques, and those plaques can sort of lead to sort of like blood clots or sort of strokes, things like that. So people may not understand the sort of that like, a really high sugar diet can actually cause those things, really. So there's definitely sort of like links between the modern sort of Western diet and sort of the increase in sort of different conditions. They've done studies actually where they have they've taken people from, or people have moved, we'll say, from relatively healthy countries where they had a very like traditional diet, like in Japan, for example, and then they've moved to North America. And then over sort of the course of sort of like a decade, they have developed all the conditions that would be associated with sort of like poor lifestyle in America, like obesity, atherosclerosis, diabetes, because they have just started to eat the same diets that are being consumed in America. I was actually I was lucky enough to get the chance to go to Japan, and Japanese people would be kind of renowned for like healthy eating and sort of eating sort of like noodles and rice and fish and vegetables and seaweed, all kind of really healthy foods. And one of the there's an island off the coast of Japan. It's called Okinawa. It's about 2 hours flight from Japan, and there's a traditional population of Okinawans that are renowned for having the longest lived lives. They've got the highest proportion of people that live over 100. And it was kind of put down to sort of like their diet, very, very sort of simple, sort of purple sweet potatoes, rice, seafood, and vegetables, and some fish as well. So that sort of was kind of looked at as a proponent for like why these people are living so healthy. But when I went to Okinawa, I was kind of excited about kind of, maybe seeing how all these people are living so long and being really healthy. And myself and my partner flew into the sort of the main capital in Naha of Okinawa, and walking down the street, I was like blown away by how many obese people there were. And I couldn't get my head around it, like why this nation is proponent, or this nation is meant to have the longest lived people in the world, but yet there was so many obese people. It turns out that after the Second World War, Americans had so many bases in Okinawa that more kind of American companies flooded into Naha, and all these kind of fast food chains sprung up over the next 30, 40 years. And the Okinawans had gone from like being one of the healthiest people in the world to being no different than any other Western nation, solely because of like all the different fast food chains that were set up and more processed foods were introduced to the diet. And I think within the last couple of years, I've heard that the Japanese government are actually trying to reintroduce the traditional way of eating back into the Okinawan diet. They're trying to like eliminate processed food and just trying to get them to eat closer to what they would have eaten before. So that's a modern example of how like society and people's health has changed over the span of like something like 50 years, really. So it kind of major impact, really.
See here, obviously, something like that isn't going to happen because the governments are making far too much money from all those fast food chains. A lot of their campaigns are probably propped up by funding and stuff from larger companies. But for people with young children that maybe listen, what way would be a good way to set your children on a path of healthy eating? For example, do you just keep putting the food down and just hopefully one day they just end up eating it? Because obviously they're asking, can I get a Happy Meal, or
I think it's
just persevere, really, is it?
Well, I think again it's doing it from a very early age, and sort of like not allowing them to develop too much of a dependency on sort of processed foods, so that they're still having they still have got the taste buds that are allowing them to sort of actually enjoy sort of like broccoli. You're going to have problems trying to get kids to eat sort of like vegetables and healthy food, but so long as they're not just continuously living on sort of processed foods and and takeaways or whatever. So making it fun, making it enjoyable, and getting kids involved in actually the process of cooking. That's sort of key as well. And that's key for adults as well. It's not just for kids. You know, the very act of making a meal and sort of using whole foods and whole ingredients is not only good for kind of instilling kind of an understanding of healthy eating, but by cooking, it's actually starting to stimulate your digestive system, and the smells that you're creating is stimulating kind of gastric juices. That means then when you put the food into your body, your digestive system's ready for that food and is able to kind of break it down, you know. So but yeah, definitely making it fun for kids, even getting them to like have little small vegetable gardens, even if it's in their own house, so they're kind of seeing the process of like how something is growing, and then how that then can be used for food, because there's a huge disconnect in what we have in our shelves wrapped in cellophane, where it's come from, and all of that sort of aspect of it as well. So just making it more fun, educating, would be kind of key, I think. Yeah.
What's the layout then of the triathlon? Is it a mile in the water, or?
Yeah, so there's different sort of disciplines, from short sprint triathlons right up to sort of what people might be more familiar with, Ironman, which is sort of like, you know, you're swimming for 3.6 kilometers, you're doing 180 kilometers on the bike, and then you're running 42 kilometers, which is a marathon. I kind of stick towards the more sensible scale, where I kind of do shorter sprint triathlons. So it's 750 meters in the water, which is half a mile. Then it's like a 20 kilometer cycle, which is about 12 mile, and then a 5K or 3 mile run. So that's sort of done at a bit more of an intensity. So you're kind of pushing at it a wee bit harder, as opposed to sort of maybe going at it for like 10 or 12 hours, which would be sort of the longer distances, like. But yeah.
I'm sure by the end you don't know whether you're still wet from the water or just from
Well, there's a period where you kind of, once you're on the bike after coming out of the water, you do dry off fairly quickly. But yeah, no, it was kind of a sport that I kind of fell into by accident, really. And there's just a nice sort of community, no matter where you go to race, north and south. It's just sort of like you meet with similar-minded people, and it doesn't matter what sport you do, really. I think that's the kind of the benefit you get out of sport, is kind of the community that you create around what you're doing, sharing similar interests, and it's almost like an escapism from everyday life. So that's always fun, and it'll be nice to hopefully get back to some sort of sense of normality, maybe, and doing some races at some stage over the next year or so, if that ever happens.
Yeah, I'm a massive believer, Ciaran. I would believe that not only does sport sort of boost your mood levels and stuff just physiologically, I think that, I'm trying to work out the best way to put it, I think that sport has like unintended consequences. Like, so we had a boxer on a wee while ago, and I was making the point that I think that getting punched in the face improves your humility levels. It humbles you.
Yeah.
And there's something, I'm obsessed with ultra runners, and you do an extreme sport yourself. Can you say what that does for your resilience levels, which are low at the minute in society? Because I know from running myself now, half marathon type stuff, nothing major, I know that you have to overcome so low points.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're the same, and that does strengthen my resilience moving forward in everyday life.
It's true. Like, I think, like, again, like, that's probably as well why I got into sort of exercising more, is because I wasn't happy with like where I was with my mood, or like in life in general. And once I started to get into exercise more, it sort of translated then into everyday life. Because when you think about it, if you're like doing a sport where you're competing, you're pushing your body and your mind to go to a place where it's not enjoyable, and it causes a lot of kind of discomfort and kind of pain. But the end result is that you come through the other side, and you kind of go, well, actually, that wasn't too bad. I was able to kind of push through there and put the head down and get on with it. And that kind of translates into sort of like everyday life, because we're always being bombarded with stuff where you kind of go, I have to do this. You don't want to do it, but you know that you can draw on that sort of experience from exercise, because it's that mental kind of training that you get, that then you can kind of go, well, if I actually just push through, I can come out the other end. And more often than not, we always say things are never as bad as they seem, and that's so true. I've actually since lockdown here in March, I've been doing a lot of sort of cold water exposure, where you get kind of into like a cold body of water for however many minutes. So I've been doing that first thing every morning for the last 2 or 3 months. I have a sort of a bathtub outside filled of cold water. So first thing in the morning, get up, put on the kettle, go outside and get into the bath for like 5 minutes. And like, there's some mornings, don't get me wrong, it's not the first thing I could think of doing, but what gets me through it every morning is projecting how I'll feel once I'm coming back into the house. Because no matter how tired you are, or how sort of grumpy you are, when you're coming back in the door after being like 5 or 10 minutes in a cold bath, you feel elated, and it sets you up for the day. And doing what's there some saying about doing the hardest thing early in the morning, because then the rest of the day everything isn't as hard as the first thing you've done. So I enjoy that, and like, that was very hard starting off, but now I'm like addicted to getting into my bath.
Addicted to pain, it seems, Ken.
It can be, yes. So like, starting off, it was like really, really painful. But your body obviously then goes through sort of a process of adapting to the cold, and like, I can sit in it for 10 minutes quite easily now, no problem. Like, but there's some interesting studies about sort of cold water exposure, and like, not only does it boost your mood, like, I've seen BBC documentaries where it was used to treat sort of depression. There was a doctor who was using it with patients to help treat depression. And you can see how that would work, because you do kind of get that sense of kind of elation afterwards, and it puts this kind of nice even kind of keel on your mood for the rest of the day. But also there have been studied into like cold water exposure and white blood cell production. So it increases white blood cell production in your bone marrow, and your white blood cells are basically your kind of army that are responsible for your immune system. So it's no harm right now to be increasing your white blood cell count. So yeah, even if you're starting off, I think like years ago I started off by just doing cold showers, or having a cold shower at the end of a warm shower, and then transitioning into maybe having just a cold shower. And so not just beneficial for your health, but think about all the money you'll save on electricity at the end of the day, So.
Is it normal to feel like whenever you get in initially to the cold bath, like you're going to have a heart attack, or is that just me?
That's definitely it's definitely normal. So what you can do there is like, when you're starting off, when you're getting into sort of cold body of water, just sort of start to focus more on your breathing. So breathing in through your nose helps to sort of calm your body. So kind of just doing mindful kind of deep breathing exercise as you're kind of getting in, and even continuing that whilst then you're in the water, or even when you're having a shower, it helps to sort of calm the body without it getting too sort of anxious and excited. But like any of these things, if you are doing it in sort of like open water, make sure you can swim and you're doing it with people around you. Never do anything like this on your own, really. So yeah. So, but you should give it a go. It's definitely it'll definitely not only strengthen your body, but it'll make you mentally tough as well. It's surprising really how it adapts you, really. Yeah. So
just a question. I know there'll probably not be a lot of triathletes that are listening, but I know that a couple of people will listen and they're sort of semi-serious about their sports. What can we do to recover better? I played football last night and I'm in bits at the minute, stiffness, joint sore. What can I do, and what can the listeners do that will improve their recovery?
Yeah, so like, just linking on from the last topic, obviously you've probably been aware of sort of ice baths and cold water treatment and even cryotherapy that like rugby players and footballers are using post exercise. So even like what happens when you get into sort of cold water, it helps to reduce inflammation in your body. So it helps to reduce sort of swelling and inflammation. So that would be a good place to start. One point on that is that the kind of science says that give at least 3 hours post exercise before you get into cold water. Otherwise, the beneficial effects that you get from exercise will be blunted by cold water submersion. As you can imagine, getting into cold water is going to just stunt everything. So you want to wait 2 or 3 hours. That's sort of like a practical thing that you can do to help reduce soreness. Food-wise, there's like brilliant anti-inflammatory foods. Like ginger is a classic. Ginger helps reduce inflammation. So like
how much ginger? So in terms of quantity, how much would you need to take to see a benefit?
Yeah, it's hard to tell really. I'd say to be more kind of consistent with nutrition. It's more kind of consistency. So like I would like even on non-training days, just try to introduce ginger as much as you can into your meals when you're cooking. Do it to taste. Starting off. Like if I'm sometimes making like a juice or a smoothie and I'm after hard exercise or whatever, I'll put in like a good thumb of ginger into it, and it might be like disgusting the taste, but I know I'm getting the health benefits of ginger. There've been studies as well on ginger that have shown that it's more effective than taking like a non-inflammatory or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like a Panadol or something like that. So ginger is really effective. Turmeric is another good one. So it's the same kind of idea. Turmeric is a really, really good one. An added benefit of turmeric actually is it can kind of improve blood flow as well around the body. So smaller amounts probably of turmeric because it can just really like overpower or destroy a meal. You can get sort of like, it's hard sometimes to get the fresh like turmeric like a root, but if you can get the fresh root, the powder stuff is fine as well. Then there's other stuff like cinnamon, which can be added, Paul, to your porridge tomorrow morning. So like a little half a teaspoon of cinnamon and stir it in. So cinnamon's like really, really good for helping to control blood sugar, but it's also really potent anti-inflammatory as well. So it's another really good one. I would then not overlook kind of different kind of edible herbs. Like rosemary is another really potent anti-inflammatory. So even like chopping up a little bit of fresh rosemary and throwing it into sort of food or whatever you're cooking, you'll not really taste it, but you're still getting the nutritional benefits of like of rosemary by reducing inflammation. Another herb is thyme. It's sort of same kind of idea. They're all really, really good for reducing inflammation. I think the key is kind of like if you're doing all these little things throughout the day or throughout your week, they all amount to a big result at the end of the day. So don't just go and rely on like consuming like ginger. Try to introduce lots of different anti-inflammatory foods as well. And another key as well, I think, is the importance of kind of trying to push out the pro-inflammatory foods. So they're all the kind of like treats and processed foods, because they actually will inflame your body and at the very least slow down the recovery process after exercise. Simple one as well is just staying hydrated. Like for the average person, we recommend 2 liters per day. So if you're exercising on top of that, you want to be drinking maybe 3, 4, because that's just going to help sort of hydrate the cell, flush out any sort of toxins, anything like that. And then like after that, then you're kind of getting into the realm of like maybe some certain supplements that might aid recovery, like vitamin C. Vitamin C is pretty safe and it's been well studied. It's a potent antioxidant, so it's going to allow your body to help reduce inflammation. That's another good one. So like sort of the cold water, it's best to probably like leave the vitamin C if you're doing a post-exercise for a couple of hours, because what happens is your body's own antioxidants are revved up after exercise to help bring down inflammation. And if you're throwing on a load of like vitamin C post-exercise, over long term, it might just start to what we call down-regulate your own production of antioxidants in your body. But vitamin C is a good one for post-exercise soreness as well. Even just then, you know yourself, just like getting blood flow, getting moving then the following day after exercise is good. So if it's a gentle walk or something less strenuous, can be quite good. So yeah, they're kind of they're the sort of the main ones really. Yeah.
I don't know about Vincent, but the main thing that I'm getting from this is consistency, number one, and commitment to the diet. Would you agree with that? You know.
Yeah. I even hate the term diet. I don't know, but
lifestyle.
I think it has I think when you say diet, it has sort of a faddish element to it.
Yeah.
It's only going to last a certain amount of time.
Yeah. Oh, like I'm going on this diet for 6 weeks because I'm going on holiday, or I'm going on here because I'm doing that. I think like there's one that our friend Ciaran and I share a friend Darren. He gave me turmeric latte, you know, the powder, and you can put it in. And it's not the nicest thing in the world, but I can always get it down knowing that at the end of it, I'm going to get a benefit. If I do that a couple of times a week, there's a benefit. Definitely. Better than drinking an ordinary latte.
Yeah, I think that's kind of brought us around like full circle, where like you've lived through that and you've actually, you can reap the benefits of doing something that mightn't be that sort of enjoyable to do, you know. So like, and that's kind of key is don't rush into sort of like nutrition and try to expect that everything is going to like change overnight and you're going to feel amazing. It is a slow process of kind of just allowing your body to get what it needs and kind of start to work and start to function again. I think like if anything, it's probably a harder sell than ever before, because we live in a society where, you know, we're just instant gratification from like Facebook, Instagram, you know, like Netflix doesn't even wait for you to watch the end credits before it starts to load another show. So it's like kind of, you're just being constantly stimulated and bombarded with things. And unfortunately, like, you know, pharmaceuticals, they work in the exact same way. You know, you've got a pain in your knee, you take a sort of a pain pill and like your pain disappears. But like nutrition and like all ancient medicine works kind of over the long term, and just starting to kind of introduce healthier foods and kind of sticking with it, and kind of you will reap the benefits like in the sort of weeks and months down the line, you know.
Ciaran, not to hold you to this or anything, but just in terms of your advice, if I was to make subtle changes, like I'm going to do the porridge thing for give it a week or two, because I think my body is now heavily reliant on the stuff that I've been eating. If I slowly but surely change the breakfast, then maybe the lunch, could my anxiety subside slightly? Obviously, it'll never probably totally leave me, but
like obviously everybody is unique, and like what might be causing like your symptoms might be different for someone else. But like definitely from like an energy point of view, being able to sort of like have a more of an even keel of like with your blood sugar throughout the day can definitely be beneficial. You know, something like, you know, stimulants like teas and coffees, for someone that might have an anxious disposition, that might just be too much, that can sort of like rev up the body too much. Like just certain people that can really tolerate like high doses of caffeine, and people can even drink caffeinated beverages before they go to bed. But like me, for example, if I drink too much coffee, it just makes me kind of frazzled and a bit wired. So everybody is unique. So starting with sort of like eliminating the sort of stimulants, trying to be more mindful of kind of like the sugar in your diet, and then getting back to sort of like the population of bacteria and fungi that live in your gut, you know, giving them what they need, like the fiber. That's really important. That's kind of key to sort of like helping sort of you from the inside, and helping your body to sort of like build sort of neurotransmitters and build proteins that it needs to sort of just function and sort of survive on a daily basis. So There's some really good like they're not exactly supplements, but they're kind of like herbs that are really, really good for anxiety. One is ashwagandha. It's basically it's used in Ayurvedic or Indian medicine, and it's a plant. You can buy it quite easily, and it's like in a powdered form. I can give you sort of links to all these sort of things anyway we're discussing, and basically when you take it, it just helps to sort of like kind of calm the mind. What it does is there's a neurotransmitter called GABA, and it's basically it puts you into sort of like a brain state that you're still alert, but you have less kind of chatter, you're less kind of anxious, and it's really, really good for sort of helping with sort of anxiety. I've used it myself for different things, and the best thing about these kind of foods is that they're not pushing your body one way or the other. They're just helping to bring things back into balance. In nutrition, they're called adaptogens. So they allow your body to kind of fall back into sort of a nice balance of where it should be. And I found that one particularly really, really good for just anxiety and sort of just helping to sort of calm your mind. And there's so many other health benefits of ashwagandha that are like sports related, that increase like VO2 max, increase muscle strength. That's sort of really interesting as well. But you'll never hear really too much about these because they're never going to be marketed or promoted as kind of something that's going to help, because there's so much money pumped into pharmaceuticals. And that, unfortunately, when you do go to sort of like a doctor and you're looking for sort of assistance, that's the kind of route you're put down. And there's so many alternative options out there that people just need to be informed and educated about, really.
So what is its original form? Is it actually like a plant, or?
Yeah. It's just a plant. Yeah.
Okay, so it's all natural stuff then.
It's all natural, and see that's the good thing about it. When you're taking something in like even a supplement is synthetically made in a lab, but with these kind of like they're foods, so they're just like, when you get it, it's like a ground up powder, so you can then add like some of that powder into like a smoothie, or if you're bold enough, just put it into a glass and just drink it. I think when I noticed the most the benefits of it from kind of a lower anxiety point of view was actually when I was teaching and just being like frazzled in the afternoon, and you're kind of just kids everywhere and everything's going off, and the classroom is just chaotic, and like having a sort of a smoothie at lunchtime that had some ashwagandha in it, and just noticing the fact that like even though everything was going off around me in the classroom, I was still really calm and able to sort of just control things and sort of like still manage without getting too worked up or stressed. So it's one thing that I continually use because I can reap and see the benefits of it, really.
Yeah, it certainly seems like a lot of the ancient wisdoms sort of ring true in terms of helping and healing society. I know I'm a big proponent of meditation, which is an ancient sort of practice, and sort of what you're saying there, sort of when everything's going on around you, if I've meditated that day, and I try to meditate twice a day, you sort of feel like you're almost in control of what's going on, even though it does seem quite hype.
Yeah.
And it brings me to a point where a lot of that is preventative. I meditate because I know that it's sort of in preparation for the worst day of your life. That's what Sam Harris calls it. Yeah. Our system seems to be based on treatment. Sort of, oh, you got a sore knee, here's a tablet. Where if you're doing the right things beforehand, your sort of knee joints and the tendons would be stronger and you'd be less inflamed. And it would save you money on the back end because you wouldn't have to be paying for healthcare as much, or I think diabetes costs a fortune on the NHS.
Oh yeah.
But if we started to do this, then it would sort of negate that. And then you mentioned it earlier yourself.
Yeah, well, like we're like, our whole healthcare system is set up to be like reactive as opposed to proactive. You know, and like what we're talking about now and what we've been kind of taught in sort of nutrition is like a holistic approach. That's a proactive way of looking at things, to kind of go, you know what, you have control over what you do. Don't just wait for something to kick off and then sort of react to it and then have to deal with the consequences. Be proactive with your health and sort of like your lifestyle, because it's, in the long run, it's actually much cheaper and much easier to do, without having to sort of deal with the consequences down the line of, you know, developing diabetes or whatever it may be. And I think that's sort of key really to sort of everything. Nutrition, exercise is just sort of like taking control of it and kind of getting the benefits of it, of what you're doing. Like you were mentioning about sort of the benefits of meditation. I've kind of dabbled a wee bit in it myself, like in and out and trying to kind of, but there's definitely benefits from it. You can definitely feel like you're just not on edge as much when you do it. Like you're just allowing your brain to sort of like calm down a bit. And even from like a scientific point of view, what's happening is you're actually allowing your brain to go from one brain state to another brain state. So it's actually, you're in a sort of more focused and relaxed brain state. And, you know, doing that can translate then into your kind of work life, into your relationships, can only be beneficial. But I think definitely there's a shift in society. More people are kind of beginning to look after themselves and their mental health. You know, even just around here, the amount of people that have like set up little veg gardens and polytunnels. You know, people now have more time to themselves because, you know, they're not working and they've rediscovered what's important in life, and that is like health and your own well-being, really.
Yeah, 100%.
The main reason behind this podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
The main reason we're doing this podcast, just to make people aware of, you know, the benefits. This is the first time we've actually went down the route of actually helping in a different sense in terms of, you know, what you're fueling your body with. The previous ones have been all about talking and, you know, what ways of finding help, but in terms of mental health, it all seems to be down to yourself anyway. So if you're putting the right stuff into your body, then it's giving you an opportunity. And I feel personally myself, for too long, I've been doing myself a disjustice in terms of filling myself full of shit. And there's been certain times like I've been turning to exercise, and because I haven't fueled my body right, it just comes a point where I just hit a wall and my brain just shuts down and the anxiety then ramps up.
So what you could do if you wanted to kind of like show firsthand the benefits of sort of like healthy eating, of sort of getting things cleaned up or whatever, I'll offer you sort of my services, and you can be accountable for me. I'll hold you accountable over the next, we'll say, whatever, 6-8 weeks. You start to slowly change things in your diet under sort of my guidance, and then you can sort of talk about sort of the changes and how they're affecting sort of maybe just everyday life, energy, sleep, mood. At least then, you know, it can be guided, but you can then share your experience with other people. And you've got a voice, you've got a platform to be able to let people know about the importance of like mental health and how you can actually change it through sort of diet and lifestyle and exercise, you know. So that could be quite an interesting trial or concept to do.
Definitely, because my education of what, like you're saying to me, eat porridge in the morning, the first thing comes into my head is like Ready Brick or something. Like, whereas if you're emailing me saying go to Asda, Sainsbury's, buy such and such, you can add this, that, and the other. I can just go in with a list and go, here, do you know where this is, or do you know where that is? And then surely it's not too difficult to prepare. So I think
that is
an
key as well.
education thing.
Yeah, it is. And like I think we like structure and we like kind of guidance. Telling somebody to go and just eat healthy
it's too vague. It's kind of like telling somebody to go and exercise. It's too vague. You need to be really specific with people and kind of go, eat this for breakfast. Here's a recipe. Just follow this. Do that because do that for a week. Do that for 2 weeks, because you forget as well that when people are busy and they don't have time to cook, and just having sort of like something to follow for the first couple of days so it becomes ingrained, then it's automatic, and then you get into sort of a cycle, and then it becomes a habit, and then before you know it, you've shifted from one position to another different position, and things have changed, so that's kind of key, and it is like anything in life, it's good having somebody to help and guide you, and just sort of an ear, just to sort of rely on from time to time.
Yeah, well, that's what myself and Vince are trying to do. We're trying to help other people just to realize, in terms of obviously this, for one, that the diet can help change. Talking to people can help you. So, everybody needs to help each other, and it's just one of those things that, if somebody else has gone through it and somebody else is advising you, it's easier to take on board, ways that you can help. Like in my job, I think preparation is probably key to the diet, because I'm a tradesman, and Vincent can probably vouch for this. He would text me like, where are you? And I'd be like, I'm in the chippy grabbing something to eat here. And then I've 10-15 minutes here, and then I'm eating it on the van on the way up the job, because I want to get finished and I want to get home to the kids, Whereas if you maybe prepare something the night before, that's down to laziness as well, probably on my behalf,
it is, and it is like a shift in kind of thinking. But exactly what you said, what we kind of talk about, batch cooking. So if you are making a meal, so maybe on a Sunday evening, you've got a wee bit more time. So when you are making a meal, even if you're making enough for like Monday and Tuesday, so that there's 2 days there in the week where you're not going to the chippy, and you have got your own meal with you. And then even if like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, you go to the chippy, you're 50% there. At least you're kind of slowly introducing kind of some healthy food into your diet, and you will, even at that sort of level, you will notice sort of benefits, so like some people prefer just to go like cold turkey, and they'll just go straight in, and they'll like get like wheatgrass, and they'll like completely change their diet, and that might work for some people, but for the most it's just not sustainable, and you'll just end up going back to the way you were eating. So you're trying
it wouldn't work for me, like
gradually, like just sort of like introduce things slowly and gradually, in sort of for yourself, even just focusing on the breakfast, just with your like oats, trying to sort of create a dish that you like getting up in the morning to eat, that's sort of appealing. And then there's things like, if there is a morning where you're like rushing out the door, you can do things like you can make overnight oats, where you put the oats with like water or milk in a sort of a jar, and you add in your berries or your banana or honey, and just put the lid on it and leave it there on the counter, so that in the morning time when you wake up, you just grab it and bring it with you. So you mightn't have time to eat breakfast, and then you can have it at like 11 or whatever. Just it's all these kind of like what's kind of known as like lifestyle hacks, or kind of little tricks that make things easy, because unfortunately all the convenience food out there is fairly unhealthy. So just trying to make your own life foods convenient is kind of important, I think. Yeah.
We'll get you back on. You can hold me accountable then.
Yeah, no, definitely. I completely on for that, like, because it's one thing, there's one thing kind of telling someone to do it, but like when they're accountable, there's more onus then for them to follow it through, because they don't want to fail, so it's like the competitive aspect of human nature means that you're more likely to succeed with something like that. And then even if that's done for 30 days, then over that period of time you've like developed new habits, and you've changed one aspect of your life, so that's it. So
Vincent will probably jump on the bandwagon here as well. What do you reckon, 50? Are you taking part?
Well, porridge is probably my go-to. I always have sort of just the wee sachets I use, because they're handy. Pour them in, frozen berries in, wee bit of milk in the microwave.
Yeah.
Great. That's some chia seeds at the end.
Yeah.
That's what I would have.
So you eat it warm then?
So I like straight after
Obviously,
this,
so
I was sitting.
the berries melt a bit, obviously, if you're having them frozen.
Yeah,
Then.
they would defrost, and then I just put in a wee bit of chia seeds because there's some good fibre. I'm a wee bit of a fibre freak. I'm obsessed with it. So
See, I've never actually seen frozen fruit before. I'm not even joking.
It's if you're talking about sort of like trying to make things cost effective for people, like you can get a big bag of oats, like a kg bag of oats for like really cheap, and that's going to last like a couple of weeks. Like frozen, like berries are really healthy, I suppose, because they're full of antioxidants and help with sort of so many things in the body, like reducing inflammation. But like getting a bag of frozen berries is great because they're going to last a long time in the fridge. You can get so many different varieties of frozen fruit now, so it doesn't have to be expensive for people starting off eating this way. Even just on its own, porridge, you don't even have to add anything on it. That's a really substantial, healthy meal in itself, really. What we're talking about adding in chia seeds and berries, they're just sort of like, they're kind of the bells and whistles on top, that are kind of making things even more nutritious. But it doesn't have to be expensive food, really. Bags of like rice, bags of like potatoes, or bags of oats. They're all like good staples that you can have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There.
Yeah. Ciaran, just to finish up, I'd like to ask a few wee quick fire questions. Just to get to know the person a bit better as well. So, what would be your favorite film, or if you're relaxing, what would you watch?
So I do like documentaries. I think like watching movies is great. I think sometimes I find that I don't have the patience to sort of deal with sort of like movies. So watching documentaries is great because you're kind of I relax when I'm watching documentaries, but. A really good documentary, and I think it's quite apt with everything we've been talking about. I watched there last night is the Avicii documentary. So Avicii, the DJ, he suffered a lot with his mental health, and actually he took his own life because of it. It's quite a nice documentary to kind of see the transition of his entire life and how he went to success, and then how he struggled with his own mental health through the rigor and demand of like his lifestyle, really. So that's quite a good documentary. Yeah, so hopefully.
Would you put that down in with your TV shows as well, or would there be any TV shows you would like to watch?
TV shows, probably not. I don't really watch too much TV. If I'm honest, yeah. So mainly documentaries would be my kind of go-to choice, really.
Would you read a lot?
Yeah, I try to read. I like kind of when I'm reading, I try to obviously keep away from anything too stimulating or nutrition related. So when I am reading, I like to kind of read like adventure books, in terms of like people maybe going on like round the world adventures, or like cycling around the world, or like even a great book that I read recently, Ernest Shackleton's book, Endure. That's really good. So it's just stuff to kind of like escapism, I suppose, that kind of takes you out of kind of your own everyday life, really. So yeah.
What about music?
Music, I like. So I've done spin classes in the past. So my music tastes have gone from enjoying sort of more like indie and rock to being forced to like more dance music and all of that, because when you're doing spin classes you need a certain BPM or a certain tempo. So yeah, I think right now I'm probably listening to more like dance music than I've ever did before. But anything really, anything with sort of a catchy melody, and I'm hooked, really. So
you sound a bit like my father-in-law. He takes spin classes, and usually it's the other way around. It's usually the older generation saying, turn that off, whereas I'm saying to him, will you turn that off?
yeah.
Put a bit of music on instead of noise.
Yeah. So,
anyway,
yeah,
thanks very much for joining us, Ciaran, and I'll keep in touch with you, and you can sort of advise me as best you can. This might be your toughest challenge.
I'm up for a challenge. If you're up for it, we can give it a go, and yeah, we can kind of document the sort of the process and see how you get on with things.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Cheers,
guys.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, Paul. See you
later.
later. Bye.
Cheers, thank you.